basically we use as references artworks in very different mediums. So we enact a painting or a sculpture or a video or an installation.
It's not necessarily about the image itself. Let's say like we do Pollock, right? There's this work which is with paint everywhere. It's very exploded, and we just do the feeling of that painting. We don't do the painting itself because it's quite, well, more or less impossible. But it's not about that. It's about this feeling of chaotic randomness, coming out of these elements that are the performance themselves. So it's very different. Like Velázquez, which is like a very static painting or something. We just do the character somehow.
We also use this term of quotation. And I think appropriation, in a sense, is quite accepted practice in the art world. And we never really claim that it is completely our own work. So the way public collection functions is that the performers always announce the artwork that is being enacted. So there is a credit to that. And it's quite clear what the reference is.
Lucian participated in 1969 in the first happening in Luxembourg, entitled
I think the work also makes artworks or the whole concept of art history a lot more accessible. I think I like to think it's also kind of pop, or it has some pop aspect to it. I think traditionally museums have implied this principle of separation, of objective experiencing of something which is taken out of its context, and you can distance yourself from that object, and the fact that you have human presence and a human living body instead of that object makes it very difficult for you to completely disidentify with that object, and it creates a potentially different affective experience as well.
You ended up charging a lot actually from the public and from the whole atmosphere that it creates, and the fact that people get to see other people and they don't see objects. And in a way, I think the work has something to do with this also, because when you see other people, you actually have empathy, and when you see objects, I mean, you can see an object, but a person or a human being says much more, transmits much more than an object. So in a way, I think that's why this piece is so strong, and so it gets you involved so much, and that's why you don't want to leave. I mean, you get there and it's just, I want to see more and more and more.
Toute la journée, jusqu'à la fin des temps.
How history is written and represented very much, and I think that we are also trying in this kind of subtle, not in a very confrontational or aggressive way, to sometimes shift or reconfigure, how history solidifies, and to actually create some movement inside, and reshuffle and reconfigure. Of course, with our means, which of course are limited in a way, but still as a proposal, which also has this political dimension of, claiming history somehow.
It also maybe says that you don't have to, that history is not fixed, and something, memories are also very subjective, and apparently, we remember things differently every time.
You still, produce your own version somehow,
I think it's more interesting to think how certain artworks echo in the present moment, and how they can be actualized, and how they can be placed into a dialogue with the actual moment.
We wanted to propose a different collection in the sense of different in nature. We call it, with quotation marks, like an immaterial collection.
This term of the immaterial is quite controversial in a way, because I think we also rematerialize artwork.
To go off screen.
So we basically use a different material, the human body and life presence as material.
To disappear.
So I guess that the objective would be to propose a different possibility to display collections or to remember artworks, but also to produce new artworks using the old ones as references or as starting points.
But we do have some references to artists that we like or to works that we think are important or significant or relevant throughout history. But also we try to always introduce lesser known works, and sometimes simply works that we like or artists that we admire or for some reason we think they should be in the collection on the same level or next to the so-called big masters or the canonical history of art.
So I guess that the aim would be to reproduce what we think it would be essential or the most important sensation or mission of the previous artwork. So in a way it has to do with a very subjective interpretation of that artwork, of course.
But I think for us it's also like a place of, like what Alexandra maybe means, it's also like a place of production, you know, so you can produce meaning and also value, you know, like question somehow the value of all these notions that are circulated around the museum. For Luxembourg, I mean, we relied on, of course, on the information that we received also from the partners, you know, regarding the history and also like the context of both Casino and Mudam. You know, that we will present the same work in Mudam as well for their anniversary. What I found particularly interesting, I mean, it's, you know, there's two things. One, the decision here, of course, to have an anniversary, but also like a closing, renovation, and the reopening with basically a work that somehow dismantles an old structure of the building, which was created for the opening of the casino. And then with a work hours that is very different, let's say, in nature than what you usually would come and encounter in museums or for such an occasion. So somehow I liked the fact that, maybe like is not a good word, but I find it quite significant, the decision, you know, to reopen and do the anniversary with these two projects. Yeah, the thing is a story that I was told by more people that I met when I did the research trip here, that when Mudam was created, there was this big desire from the part of, you know, politicians and public and so on to have a certain kind of collection and greatness that you, let's say, have in neighboring France, yeah, like, you know, to have all these masters and all these pieces and so on. And so on one hand I thought, okay, we are bringing with our collection some of this, let's say, I mean, it could sound like a prank, but it's interesting, you know, all these kind of desires that, you know, to have the big masters in the collection. Somehow we bring it in our collection. We have Picasso, we have, you know, Da Vinci and so on. So it was also interesting to somehow fulfill this, this dream somehow, you know, it was present or lurking about in a very different way with a very different proposal that maybe also, you know, is somehow related or commenting on, let's say, the moment we are in now, the 21st century, you know. We have a group of performers right now that we have been collaborating with for several projects, you know. And so they also know a little bit how we work and the work. And we do speak about the intentions of the work. We do talk about the, let's say, conceptual or formal aspects of the works that we are enacting.
It's mostly situations that we imagine in advance, so it's not improvisation-based work.
No.
It's not about the performers bringing in material or constructing the work. I think it's an interesting moment to work with a live presence in the museum or in the gallery space. I think it is a moment that can be definitely used to produce very different displays and formats, and also maybe different encounters between the audience and the objects and subjects that they encounter, and they can empathize with.
When you have people, the rhythm changes. So the public really changes the energy, and the piece itself is really actually interactive. For me, it's this thing, because actually the public, it's really important. I mean, it changes the whole thing in a way.
Une colonne imaginaire de 32 pieds sur la place Guillaume à Luxembourg. Une colonne imaginaire de 33 pieds sur la place Guillaume à Luxembourg. Une colonne imaginaire de 35 pieds sur la place Guillaume à Luxembourg.
The time and the temporality of the work is also quite important. And that's why maybe also we try to avoid describing the work as performance, because I think the duration and the fact that it unfolds in time and you can experience it somehow anew every day, even if the material is somehow fixed, but there's also kind of a different experience of it every day. So I think the work Ongoing Action also describes the work's distribution in time a lot better.